afternoon, everybody. And I say with great humility, welcome to the new virtual home of Irish rugby. Keep your eye on this backdrop and you'll understand what I mean by that in a few moments. You're all very welcome to the annual Lansdowne Business Lunch. You might notice it is a little bit different this year. You are joining us here in the Fuel Studios in Dublin. And I have to say, what a fantastic job they have done in supporting this event. Particular welcome also to those that are joining us from overseas. Some great attendance overall, and we thank you all for that, but also we're being joined by folks in the US, Germany, Switzerland, and the UK. And you're very, very welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join this event. We are, of course, particularly delighted to have as our special guest the Executive Director and CEO of Aircap, Macquarie Cup winner, and most importantly, coach to the Lansdowne Under-10s, Mr. Aengus Kelly. Gus will be welcomed in a few moments. In fact, Gus is such an impressive guest that we're going to introduce him at least 3 times. But before I do, a word or two. I don't know what you thought about that introductory video, but I know every time I've seen it, and there've been a few, I just get some hairs, if I had some, on the back of my head. It reminds us of some great times in Lansdowne. But the good news is, those great times will be back with us again soon. The theme of today is we will be back and soon. Now, the whole purpose of today is, of course, to listen to some real business insights and some sporting insights, but also to have some fun. You probably ask, how do you propose to do that? Well, stay with us because we've quite a few surprises and, most importantly, you all can connect and link with us. Everyone has access to a chat function and a polling function. It is simple, easy to use, and right beside the comment area on the platform. So we want lots of chat. There will be some questions because you can actually outline some questions which Gus may be able to take at the end of the session, and I hope he will. But we are also running a little quiz. And all you have to do is answer 2 very simple questions to get access to and hopefully be the winner of 2 excellent prizes. We'll talk through that during the course of the afternoon. We shall also be doing some polling. Again, very easy and simple to use. And if you have any issues, just mail Tinga. His email address is on the registration area when you've already logged in. So let's get going. Let's move it on. But before I do, I'd like to introduce the president of Lansdowne FC, the great Colin Goode, for words of welcome and thanks.
Good afternoon and welcome to Lansdowne FC's first ever virtual business lunch. My name is Colin Goode, president of Lansdowne FC, and I'd like to welcome you all here today, those of you who have joined us for many years and those of you joining in for the first time. Thank you all for joining us. As you're all too aware, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and we're all being forced into new procedures for work, socialising and hosting events such as today. We have to be creative and continue to think outside the box, and thankfully we did not have to look too far outside of the Lansdowne family to find a very formidable, progressive and professional company to host today's events. Fuel HQ is owned and operated by Brian McDermott and Jamie Deasy, 2 Lansdowne men with huge connections to Lansdowne through their families. And indeed, many Lansdowne people are employed by Fuel, including our ex-coach, Will Matthews. We have Nathinga Mapuka, we have Paddy Shaw, and of course we have the long-suffering Nicky Tunney here as well, who was married into the Tunney clan. As you're aware, every good crisis, or indeed every pandemic, brings opportunity. And today, as Mano has alluded to, we're joined by people from all over the world, from as far away as Australia, New York, Sydney, everywhere, and London. We're joined in London by former club captain Ron Boucher, in Wales by former first team coach Mike Ruddock, in Dublin by current club captain Jack Dewan and current club coach Mark McHugh. You're all very welcome. Of course, even with family and mates rates, everything has a cost. This newfound technology is expensive and doesn't pay for itself. So we're very grateful to the MMPI group, Brian Maloney and team, for sponsoring today's event. Simply without MMPI and Brian, there would be no event, digital, virtual or otherwise. So thank you, Brian and MMPI. As with every event, they don't magically happen. We are very blessed in Lansdowne to have a business lunch committee headed by Kieran O'Reilly, former president, ably assisted by Michael Ryan, Will Sparks and Gavin Lee. To them, we owe a debt of gratitude for enduring many Zoom calls and working tirelessly since last year to get this event from concept to where we are today. To Kieran and his team, we thank you. Every year the committee come up with great guests, and we've had guests such as the late and great Peter Sutherland and more recently Anne Herity. And if you listen carefully to Anne last year, some of you may have joined in her recent success. So I'm glad to see that the bar has been raised even further again with today's guest, Angus. Angus is a leader in his field, a CEO with Aircap, a global industry leader, and one of Ireland's top CEOs. We're very lucky to have him. And indeed, we didn't have to travel too far to find Angus, as Angus is a coach in our minis and youth section and a former rugby player with another club. But we won't go into that just yet. I will allow our host go into more detail when introducing Angus, but we look forward to a great day, a great introduction into business life and how the current pandemic is affecting the aviation industry. Finally, and without further ado, I would like to thank our host today and Master of Ceremonies, the one and only Mano Ryan. Mano, of course, is a well-regarded former player of Lansdowne and always gives his time freely and generously when called upon. For those of you who know Mano well, you know he's in his element today. And despite his demands of black and yellow M&Ms, smoky bacon crisps, and a dry martini, shaken not stirred, we believe it's worth having him here today. But in all seriousness, we are very fortunate to have such a professional and capable host in Mano. Mano, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. Mano, back to you.
Thank you, Colin. And the M&Ms were delicious, very much appreciated. Now, to the man of the moment. Please join me in looking at a video which will provide us with a very good introduction to the one and only Gus Kelly.
Aengus Kelly was educated at St. Michael's College in Dublin. He continued his studies at University College Dublin, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in commerce and a master's degree in accounting. He spent 3 years at KPMG, where he trained as a chartered accountant. During that time, he was seconded to Guinness Peak Aviation, one of the 2 founding companies of the aircraft leasing industry. Angus continued his career with GPA's successors in both Europe and the US. He served as Aircap's group treasurer before becoming chief executive officer of Aircap's US operations. In May 2011, he was appointed chief executive officer and executive director of Aircap. In 2014, Angus led the acquisition of US-based ILFC, which was the largest M&A transaction ever in the aircraft leasing sector. In 2016, Aircap relocated its global headquarters from Amsterdam to Dublin and helped to solidify Ireland's position as a center of excellence in the aircraft leasing industry. Today, Aircap is the largest owner of commercial aircraft in the world with over $45 billion in total assets and a further $22 billion of new technology aircraft on order.
Wow, that is some story. I am delighted to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, Angus Kelly. Gus Kelly, thank you very much for giving us your time today, and we're absolutely thrilled to have you here with us.
Mano, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to do it. Lansdowne is such a fantastic club. And just a word to the members. I know that Colin very graciously thanked the team, but as the members of the club, and I'm one too, I think we have to be so grateful for the commitment and dedication of the people who are putting this together on a voluntary basis, because I saw it. I saw the commitment that these people are going to on behalf of the club. So thank you very much as a member.
Well, thank you. We've got about 30 minutes, Angus, and it's going to be, there's a lot to go through. So I'm going to start at the beginning, but before I do, it's been a year that obviously Colin has referred to, a strange year. Just wondering, just straight up, we do want to get to the beginning of the story, but what's the year been like for you? What were you doing this time last year? Where were you hoping you'd be today?
Well, I was hoping, I couldn't think of a better place to be,
Yeah.
but certainly from a professional standpoint, I was hoping to be in a very different place. I would say, you know, I've been through 9/11, the financial crisis, SARS, but we've seen nothing like this ever in our business. People thought the world couldn't stop, but the world did stop. And when you're the largest owner of commercial aircraft in the world, and we would normally buy, sell, or lease an airplane every 24 hours, and we buy $100 million of airplanes every week. That's the run rate CapEx for Aircap. When you're sitting there in April and the world stopped, you felt very different, I can tell you. But look, you get on with it, you get your head down, and you come through it. And so what I would say is very difficult times in March, April, May. But then it's like everything, you know, you got a mountain ahead of you, and you just got to take one step at a time. You can't look up, just keep doing one thing at a time, and you start to get through it. And then you get through it eventually when you got the right people around you.
Well, hopefully we're at the point of the beginning of the end. But let's talk a bit about that later as we go. Great introductory video. A couple of shots there from St. Michael's and UCD and obviously KPMG. I'd love to hear the story, the Gus Kelly story from Michael's, and you know what your influences were, how you ended up in UCD and into KPMG. I'd love to hear that.
Unusually, I had a burning desire to be a Big Six chartered accountant from when I was 12 years old, I guess. The family were all accountants, and my grandfather moved to Dublin from Fermanagh, and he set up an accountancy firm here. And for some reason, I always just wanted to be an accountant, and that's what I wanted to do. So I did my BCom in university, and had a great time in college, played college rugby, played freshers, tremendous experience, great friends for life. And then went into KPMG, and just, you know, sometimes it's just, you have sliding doors moments in your life.
Yep.
You do. They're not completely random, I don't think. Someone has given you some impetus to do something earlier on. Small thing for me was, I always remember watching the Late Late Show in the mid-'80s in Ireland, which is a fairly economically dark place at the time. And there's this guy, Tony Ryan, came on, who was the founder of GPA. Great sartorial splendor, white suit, you know, the blue shirt, the white collar, and talking about selling airplanes all over the world. I thought, God, that's what I want to do. And it seemed so glamorous. Now that company fell on hard times, but we resurrected it, and we are where we are today. We have to change the name. But the thing was, when I got to KPMG, one of their biggest clients was GPA. And I was asked, do you want to go down to Shannon? I said, absolutely, sign me up. Not everyone wanted to go down to Shannon at the time. There was no N7 at that time. It was a lot of stops on the way. So you took your chance, you got it, you got down there, and that was, I suppose, the big chance, and you seize it.
Fantastic. And you know, along The journey, who were the big influences then? Gus, Tony Ryan, presumably. Were there others?
Well, he was an initial influence of
Yeah.
just, this
Yeah.
industry. And
Yes.
frankly, in Ireland at the time,
Yeah.
that, you can
Sure.
become number one in the
Yeah.
world. I think that's very important that
Yeah.
if you work extremely hard and you've got a great people around you, there's no limit to the ambition you should have and go after it. But then there's other people, so he was certainly for that, but I think then there was the initial CEO of GPA, or the CEO of GPA when I was there, Patrick Blaney, was an inspirational character for me. And then later on, as I progressed, some of the members of the board, because, sometimes, you need someone to tell you, go on, you can do it, give it a go. You can have you can have a modicum of success, which is great, don't get me wrong, and you get very comfortable.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need someone to say, go on, why are we here?
Yeah. And then you obviously you're in the business, and it'd be great to describe the journey into Aircap and the early 2000s up to 2011. I'd love to hear that journey, and perhaps a word or two on the the evolution of aviation leasing and the impact that has had on business and travel globally.
Sure, delighted to. The period you're talking about, in our business, every 10 years, there's something goes wrong. We had the Gulf Wars in the early 90s.
Yeah.
The period you just mentioned, Mano, was post 9/11.
Yes.
Now, post 9/11 was an extraordinarily challenging time. At the time, this aircraft leasing business was a niche industry. Airlines tended to own all of their own airplanes. That changed gradually over time. And post 9/11, we had a very difficult time. Luckily, we had managed to sell the business prior to 9/11 in 1998 to several German banks and Daimler Chrysler. And then in 2005, we bought it back from them and another MBO with a company called Cerberus, which is a big private equity fund, which would be well known in Ireland for other
Yes.
investments. And then the financial crisis came. That was the next thing. The business had kept growing. The financial crisis came. Now, luckily, from my days in GPA, and I suppose to anyone on the call, look, a lot of businesses, it ultimately goes wrong because you run out of cash.
Yeah.
Very few businesses don't go wrong if they have plenty of cash.
Yeah.
And we'd learned that lesson in the early 90s. And so when 9/11 came, while you can never predict an event like that or a black swan event, you can prepare for it.
Sure.
And so, when the financial crisis came, we did have an awful lot of capital available. At that time, our major shareholder, Cerberus, we were a listed company on the New York Stock Exchange, but they were still the largest shareholder at about 20-odd%. And they got into trouble with Madoff. Madoff had a lot of common investors with Cerberus, and they were calling the capital out of Cerberus because they'd been burnt by Madoff. And one of the big liquid investments they had was us, and we were the only buyer on the street because we had the cash, no one else did. Difficult negotiation with the boss of Cerberus when you're saying, okay, look, I am the only bid, so do you want the cash or not? And so I suppose I give that story as I said, you can't predict when a terrible event will happen or there'll be tremendous volatility, but you've got to try and prepare for it. And that takes a fair bit of discipline, as because it does cost money to prepare for things. You have to give a little bit up to be ready when things get very tough.
And then at that point, Gus, you started running the US part of the business when?
I was sent over to the States in late 2007.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and at that time as well, this is, for that business, Cerberus, and some people will no doubt know them in Ireland, and for me, they were tremendous. I mean, they are what you want a shareholder to be. They said to me, look, this is going to work out one of two ways for you.
Yeah.
You're going to make you a rich man or blow your brains out. But they said, the opportunity is up to you. It's easy to have that kind of tough talk, but the reality is if they say that and then they back off and say, we've got your plan, we understand it, now you go and do what you told us you'd do, and if you achieve it, that's great. Those guys sent me over to the States at that time, and again, in their style, they said, we're going to pick a CEO from you or the other guy who was running the European business. We're going to run for a couple of years, and that happened. And luckily, I got the nod. And of course, their final question was, well, what's going to happen to the other guy? I said, well, look, he's got to go. They said, that's the right answer.
Oh,
you got the gig.
Oh, well done.
Because you couldn't, when a company has tremendous friction, you've got to bring it back together again.
Yeah.
So
that's a remarkable story. And then obviously that went well. And then 2011, you
2011, I took over as the overall CEO at that point. I was appointed in 2010, and then the AGM occurred in 2011. And then, look, it was, we saw that there was a very large competitor of ours, the largest in the world, called ILFC, which is owned by AIG, the large insurance company. AIG at that point was controlled by the Federal Reserve. AIG was the biggest insurance company in the world. And they had investments all over the place. And one of them was this. They owned $35 billion of airplanes. And they were trying to get rid of the business. And there was a number of people publicly tried to buy it, but they failed. They couldn't raise the capital to get there. We were lucky in that the chairman of UBS, Axel Weber, who was also the chairman of the Bundesbank previously in Germany, he had done UBS had done a lot of business with us. We went to them and said, look, this is what we're thinking of doing. Can we get them? Can you back us?
Yeah.
And he said, okay. I met him, we'd worked with him for months, and a final meeting with him in New York before I had to go down and meet the Fed, because the Fed controlled AIG, and to do the deal, I needed to get the Fed on board. So he said to me, listen, you can tell the Fed you're good for the money. Ooh. So when I walked into the meeting then later that day with the Fed, AIG's buildings down at the very bottom end of Manhattan, the Federal Reserve were there, good few representatives, because AIG was an enormous investment for them. And they said, listen, you're the 14th person who's come in here and told us you've got the money. How do we know you're good for it? And I said, well, Axel Weber, the chairman of the Bundesbank, says I'm good for it. Yeah. So they said, if the chairman of the Bundesbank says you're good for it, you're good for it. And that's how it was an important thing to get the thing over the line. And
it was the biggest and remains the biggest transaction in the space. And one thing I wanted to ask you about that, because it's a big piece of growing any business. But mergers, acquisitions, post-merger, how did all that work? I mean, I see you've got, is it Peter's come on board now as the CME? He was from
ILFC.
Yes. So, I mean, how did that work? Was there a lot of stress? What would your message be to anyone taking on from the small to the large a merger? What should they look out for? What were the lessons you learned?
We learned a lot along the way. We bought a bunch of companies and done MBOs along the way and made pretty much all the mistakes you can make. I think there's two things for me, really. You've got to pick the right people and move quickly. You think you're doing people a favor by trying to prolong what is inevitable. And what actually happens is, I was very sad, when we closed our head office in Amsterdam. The two main offices were Amsterdam and Los Angeles. And, a lot of people in Amsterdam thought, we're the acquiring entity and you're shutting our office as part of this. Some people felt betrayed by that, but it was an inevitability that we had to come to Ireland, and it was an inevitability we had to leave the United States because of the higher corporation tax there at the time. What's interesting is some of the directors, and it's an important point for this country, many directors of this company are American, and it's such a huge effort to move a business. As they said to me, if this had happened after Trump became president and dropped the tax rates, would we have moved from the US? I said, probably not. It'd be too hard. Yeah. But anyway, to answer your question, right, I would say, look, pick the people, and you know what, you've got to try and be so neutral if you can about it. Doesn't matter what jersey they're wearing. You've got to pick the best person, and if you're bringing two companies together, you've got to bring a mix together. You have to, or else it's not going to be the same, and you're going to have resentment in the organization. But I gave the example of the Amsterdam office. My mistake was we left it open for too long. It was inevitable what was going to happen. Everybody knew it. And should have just shut it off the bat. We knew it was going to happen inevitably, and so I really would think. And then another thing in M&A is, if you buy another company, move quickly, pick an IT system. A thing that happens is if you have the same IT system afterwards, 2 IT systems running parallel, what will happen is the other company will say, well, we have to do things this way because our IT system forces us to do it that way. No, pick one, and you may be wrong, but you'll be wrong quickly, and it'll be better off than having 2 systems competing with each other and people saying, I'm doing it this way and fighting with each other.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So move quick, don't be sentimental, make it happen. And you know, at a general level, you're now the largest, fantastic achievement. And you know, what's the biggest challenge that you see now in the position as being the market leader? You know, with you know, more than anyone else. Are you the hunted? Does your scale allow you? You know, what are the big issues that you're thinking about now that you're the biggest?
Well, because we were one of the smallest, we were a GPA, and we learned pretty quickly that hubris can knock you over very quick. They went from the biggest to the smallest, and then we built it back up. So you can never let complacency seep into an organization. Inevitably it does to some extent. You have to be realistic about that. There'll be some inefficiency that comes with scale, whether you like, there's some benefits, there's huge benefits come with scale, but you know, you're not always as nimble as you might like to be. That's just a reality. But I would say that we have tried to keep that ethos in the business of, if you work hard in Aircap, this should be a better place for you than anywhere in the world in this industry. And that's the promise. If it were, because that was the ethos of the company from the get-go. When we were in GPA, we were fighting for our lives. We had no one else to save us. And it was very clear that if things worked out, it was going to work out well. And then we were bought by Daimler Chrysler and 5 German banks. And the world changed. It didn't matter if you worked 24 hours a day. Your variation in compensation and career prospects was, you know, 10 or 15% besides someone who did, you know, maybe 2/3 of the work. It was a great lifestyle. Everybody was given a company Mercedes, the secretaries, everybody. It was great fun. Long holidays. But it was demoralizing within a business that's so focused on the human capital, that there's not many of us, but a lot of financial capital. And I think it was detrimental to that business in a big way. And so I would say, for me, the most important thing as CEO is that people feel they get a fair shot here. And if they work their socks off, this should be the best place in the world in our industry to be.
Well, it's great. It's obviously working. We're going to talk about Ireland in a couple of minutes and the pandemic and the influence on the pandemic. But in this block, because I know there's an awful lot of interest in it, what is your sense of travel post-pandemic? How do you see it? What bets you're making? What risks are you hedging? What's the sense?
You know, look, of course, we're looking at that all the time. We're looking at data from all over the world every day. We look at flight data, consumer behavior. We're looking at hotel bookings. And it's fair to say that the consumer wants to travel pretty quickly as soon as they can. The evidence of that, I'll give you a couple of examples. The bottom in the European aviation market was on the 14th of April. Or 12th of April. We went to 2,099 flights in the European airspace. We would normally have about 32,000 flights. So a collapse of over 90%, unimaginable collapse. Within 9 weeks, we were back to 19,000 flights a day.
Wow.
So the consumer wanted to go straight away. Because Ireland is not representative of the global economy or global travel. So what was happening in Ireland was very different to what was happening in the rest of the world when it came to travel. And so we saw that then the pandemic hit Europe again, things fell down. Things picked up a lot into Christmas. There was a lot of travel because you could see it every time people got the chance to book, they're doing it. And so we saw coming into Christmas, big surge in bookings. Then we've had the lockdown in Europe over the course of the last, I suppose, 5 weeks or so. We've seen a big fall off. And we suspect that for most of Europe, we'll start getting up and going again around Easter time. It won't be unconstrained travel. There'll be limitations, probably intra-EU at the start, I suspect. Whether Ireland participates in that or not is another matter. But you've got to realise in Europe, of course, there are land borders.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can drive from Copenhagen down to the foot of Italy, unrestricted at the moment still. You know, you can drive through the borders. So I do think that we'll see that. Ireland, I suspect, will be a good bit behind the rest of Europe. I'm positive, actually. And so they're certainly trying. The Danes are going to have vaccine passports. Now, that's the European market, and we see consumer behaviour the same around the world. China, you know, we haven't spoken about China. China's coming. I mean, it's an unstoppable trend. The Chinese market as well, that bottomed because it came first in China.
Yes.
The bottom hit China on the 21st of February of 2020. They went from about 14,000 flights a day to just under 2,000 flights a day. They got back to 14,000 flights a day in August. And they've been there pretty much, but there's been another outbreak of the infection in China over the course of the last 4 weeks, and they're down to about 50% of where they were, but they'll go back up pretty quickly. And you know, in China, we look at things like Disney World in Shanghai. What are the bookings for it? And so the last thing to open up in Shanghai was Disney. Once it opened, again, consumer behavior. It was sold out in a couple of hours for the whole week ahead, every day. And that's thousands and thousands of people going through it. So this can be done, and it is being done around the world. We saw the same trends in the US market. But Mano, a very important thing to note about the world today is the world's a big place. You know, there's about 700 million or so live in Western Europe and North America. That's 10% of the world's population.
So true.
That's the sum total of it.
Yeah.
Now, we do business in 100 countries around the world, South America, Africa, all parts of Asia. And as the CEO of the biggest airline in Africa, Ethiopian Airlines, great airline, taken over the mantle from South African Airways as the biggest and most successful airline there. We were talking about the impact of the pandemic and how it's hitting the economy. He said, you know, this is a rich man's disease. He said, the vast majority of the world, the idea that we could sit at home and get paid by the state, he said, you got to remember, we work for lunch in the morning, we work for dinner in the afternoon. It's crazy that you guys think most of the world can do what you're doing. That's not the case.
It's an interesting space.
And that's the reality of the world out there.
Yeah. It's a kind of a wow when you hear that one. But interesting, you mentioned Asia and obviously China. And, you know, I think we spoke previously about, you know, what is happening in Asia and what that means for travel and what that means for aviation. And, you know, what is your sense of all of that and, you know, doing business in China? And because I listened to a great talk you gave in Bloomberg where you made the point, you know, if you want to set up an airline in the US, you set it up. You meet the regulator, you do what you got to do. Not quite the same in China. And, you know, did that, were you saying that, you know, there are barriers, great opportunities, but big barriers? And if there's both, how are you taking advantage of the opportunities and how are you overcoming the barriers? It is a land of opportunity. I mean, just to give you context, if you go back 20 years or so, the vast majority of travel happened in the Western Hemisphere, mainly in Europe, North America, the North Atlantic, that was it. But you look now, China is going to be the largest market in the world very shortly. 25% of everything Boeing makes, everything Airbus makes goes to China. That's where it's going. So it's coming. So the opportunity is huge. And that's a microcosm for every business in the world. Now, so that's great to say things like that. And I'm sure many people listening are saying, that's great for you to say that. But we weren't always big, right? And to get into China is not easy. And you've got to be there personally often. You've got to do your work. You've got to have a product. And certainly going in at the start, you'll need a partner. And it sounds so far away from many people. And there's lots of opportunity close to home. The European Union's a massive market for us. The UK's a big market, the States. But the future is somewhere else. The future is somewhere else. And if you just look at the growth out there, I mean, the first time I went to Beijing, probably 20 years ago, there was Ring Road number 6 when I came out of the airport. I saw a sign for Ring Road number 6.
So I think, like anything, if you work really hard at it and you put the personal time in there, but you have to be there.
Yeah.
You have to meet the people. You have to respect their cultures.
Sure.
It's very important, really important in China, how they view a relationship with someone, even if you have an interpreter. And it can be, I've sat through an enormous amount of dinners with an interpreter, drinking Mao Tai, which is the spirit of choice for the Chinese. But they're like everyone else. They just want a better future for their children. They want to do that. If you can help them do that, they're going to work with you. It's not something to be afraid of. Yes, it's distant. And, not everyone needs to go there now, but if you're thinking about the longer term, it's there. But there's a lot of opportunity close to home as well. And again, we started out, we weren't a fraction of the size, but you just need a bit of gumption, hard work, and the team that are willing to go out there every day, banging down the doors. And sometimes it feels like you roll a boulder up the mountain and then it comes back down on top of you. You've got to get back up and try and push it back up the mountain again,
It's a huge opportunity, and what you say is so true. And and there's so much I'd love to cover in this area. And I'm going to just do a quick time check because we've a very, very, very important quiz that we need to run, Gus, as you know, some very important questions. So if someone could just give me an idea of where we are time-wise, that'd be a big help. Tell me, well, you know something, because we're going to start the quiz.
Brilliant.
To everybody. So, amazing. We've two other big topics that I would like to cover, obviously, Ireland and the pandemic. But let's just go very quickly to the quiz, if we may. And folks, this is your opportunity to start pressing a few buttons and making sure those chats come through. We have 2 quiz questions, 2 prizes. I'm going to let Gus introduce one of the most outstanding prizes you're ever going to see. And the other prize is actually a fantastic dinner for 2 from the Chop House in Dublin, kindly presented by Lansdowne member Kevin Arundel, and many, many thanks to you, Kevin, for that. But let's go with the questions quickly. I think you'll enjoy this. First question, and just bring them in the chat. First question, what percentage of the world's aircraft are leased? Simple question, nearest answer wins, first in wins. And Gus, this is for you also. In what year did Gus Kelly win the Macquarie Cup? In what year did Gus Kelly win the Macquarie Cup? Some polls, we'd like you to go with some polls. In line with Gus's points earlier on about travel and what's happening, first polling question is, when do you think you will next take an overseas holiday? 4 choices, Q2 of this year, sorry, Q3, maybe Q2, we'll go with Q2.
Go Q2.
Q2, Q3, Q1, Q2. Thereabouts. Next, and this is key, this is what it's all about. How do you feel about Ireland's chances in the Six Nations? 6 choices, 1st place to 6th place. Over to you. On the prize, Gus, I think we'll offer, your choice, can we offer the Macquarie Cup winner a magnificent model here that we have in front of us?
I think we can, Mano. It's a tough question, but I think it's worth it. I think the prize is worth it.
It is worth it. It is worth it. So there we go. Let's get him in. Let's get the chat going. Let's get the responses going, and we will make sure it all happens. Okay. So to Ireland, business in Ireland, Gus, if we may, a few minutes on this. A couple of things. How do you think Ireland Inc. are doing? Do you have any particular thoughts on things that we could have done better over the last 5 years? How do you think we've handled the pandemic, and your thoughts on Irish education? A few quick fire ones.
Look, I think from the business perspective, what Ireland has achieved in the last 20 years is fantastic. I think it's tremendous. I mean, there's a lot of forward-thinking government policy by numerous governments over 20 years that did have a big focus on FDI. And we don't have natural resources. Small population, 5 million, not a lot of population density. And I think we did a tremendous job to attract the companies of the future to this country. It's great to get jobs, that's fantastic. And it's great that, before the pandemic, we were effectively full employment. Particularly coming out of the back of the financial crisis, to do that, you have to give some credit to the politicians. I know they get plenty of reasons to knock them, but you have to give them some credit too as well. And it's the companies of tomorrow that are here. The Facebooks, the Amazons. There's no big tech or pharma company that's not in this country. And that is brilliant. We're not in fossil fuels. We're not in businesses of the past. And the real hope now is that we can create our own Facebooks, that we'll have our own Zuckerbergs here, and they learn from working in these companies and learn and set up their own businesses. So I give a lot of credit for that. The past, look, the pandemic is the pandemic. It's been very difficult. We have a coalition government of 3 political parties where they're all afraid of each other and they're afraid of Sinn Féin. Had some involvement on the Transportation Committee, which is public. And it was clear to see that there are certain politicians who wanted to go slightly different routes, but because you had to cater to the lowest common denominator in a coalition of 3, I think that is something that has made our ability to react not quite what it could have been for a small country, not densely populated, an island. We had a lot of structural advantages over others dealing with the pandemic, and I'm not sure we made the best of that.
Yeah. Well, again, looking at time, I think we've unfortunately got 5 minutes left, is that right? And so much more we could talk about, but we have to get to really the most important topic of all, and that's what you've learned from coaching the under-10s, how much rugby has influenced you in your approach to business. And I think we're going to have to talk about the Six Nations as well. But the mini rugby in Lansdowne, what do you think?
Rugby in Lansdowne is fantastic. I mean, Lansdowne, the club, is an inspiration as well. You think back when Henry Dunlop founded the club 148 years ago. It was the second string team for Trinity, Yes, and now look at the club. No more successful club in the country than Ireland. Captain of Ireland, James Ryan, in the club as well. Numerous Lions as well. So it's a fantastic club. And, for me, a club it's great to be a big club, but it's also the ethos of a club that really matters. And are people going to come in, get behind the bar on a Sunday morning? What you guys are doing here today for the club all in your own time. It's that ethos, that welcoming of Lansdowne I found, and it's typified by the mini rugby and the great times my son is having and the friends I've made with the other coaches down there. I have to give a big shout out to them, our gaffer, Dave McKeown, Andrew Gunn, Alan Redden, Mr. Richardson. There's a load of them. I can't mention them all. All good guys.
Great guys. Look, it's fantastic that you're really enjoying that. And I think we've got a couple of questions and we probably want to give out these prizes. But there's an interesting question. If you could, do you mind taking a
Not at
question?
all.
Can you see that one, Gus?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. It looks like, question for Gus. Rocky from American Express. Do you foresee a situation whereby the aviation industry won't be ready or have the capacity for when business travel is likely to return towards the end of Q3 this year? Thank you very much for that question.
Rocky, on a global basis, I don't. In this country, I'm less convinced about it. Globally, it won't be a problem. In the US, people are flying every day. There's, the best part of 1 million people fly every day in the US now at the moment. I think yesterday it was about 780,000 people flew in the US on a daily basis. So around the world, it'll happen. But there's going to be different parts of the world will be slower to recover. And certainly this country, I think, will be an outlier based on what we're doing at the moment.
And do you see, it's something that always intrigues me, in terms of capacity, the work that Boeing and Airbus do and where they are and what's going on in China, how are they looking at things? Boeing have had the 737 MAX issue, which seems to be done and dusted. Where do you think their heads are at with all of this?
These are difficult times, These are very challenging times. So at the moment, Boeing would have the best part of probably 50 billion of inventory on the ramp that they haven't been able to shift just yet. Now, the customer has to come and get it, but Boeing has had to be a shock absorber, a bit like we've had to be a shock absorber for our airlines. People weren't flying. We had to give them credit, extend payment terms, and it's the same with Boeing and Airbus. There's a lot of stuff, but it'll get delivered because every 15 years in the world, over the last 60 years, the number of people traveling in the world doubles. There's 100 million people get on a plane for the first time in their lives every single year in the world. So, yes, we are being knocked for six here this year, but people are going to travel.
No, which is great news. I think we're nearly there on time, aren't we, folks? Yeah. Well, thank you, Gus. That has been absolutely. We've got a couple of other questions which we can actually. I think we can take time-wise, can't we? Yeah, we've time to take them. Excellent. Now, Gus, I hope your eyesight is slightly.
I can see him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Gus, do you want to see him and maybe even read him out? That'd be a big help.
Yeah. So when do you think you'll have your next overseas holiday? So I love this. The winning answer is Q3 2021 at 52% of the audience. That's brilliant. I hope you really enjoy your trip. Try and take two. And then the next one. How do you feel about Ireland's chances in the Six Nations? Ooh, third place, 41%. Oh, I don't know. We could be more bullish there.
Yeah,
could
we
be
got to
Mano.
talk about that. We got to talk.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah. And thank you very much for that. And then, of course, the winners we will be announcing at the very end. We're going to announce the winners at the very end. But I think time-wise, we're probably thereabouts. And I really, really want to thank you so much, because I think if we could have run this for a 2-hour event, we would have just about got through question 3. You know, that was absolutely tremendous. Very, very much appreciated. And we're going to hand over in a minute to the inevitable end of the evening. We'll start with a few words from that wonderful and esteemed president, the great and the illustrious Colin Goode.
Flattery will get you everywhere, Mano. Thank you. Just in the COVID times we live in, we'd like to thank Angus greatly for coming here today, and a fascinating story. And in what's a small world, one of his mentors in GPA is indeed my brother-in-law, Patrick Blaney. So it's a small world we live in. But on behalf of the members, Angus, and we'd like to present you with a copy of Spurious, which coincidentally enough is between Wanderers and Lansdowne. And it's scrumptious, sorry, I would get pillared for that. It's scrumptious. But you can't buy this. This has to be presented, and we're honoured to pass it on to you, and hopefully you'll enjoy it for many years to come. We also have a bottle of red from our own vineyard in the Dodder Valley, so we hope you enjoy that. Back to you, Mano. Thank you very much, Angus.
Thank you very much, Colin. And again, thank you very much indeed, Gus. A couple of things. The winners are coming through for the questions, so we'll announce those in a couple of moments. But I suppose a word or two to fuel, actually. I did mention at the start that welcome to the new virtual home of Irish Rugby. And I think you can see from the fantastic illustration we have here, I think that's the old Lansdowne Pavilion. And everything that Fuel have done for us, from providing us with this fantastic capability and also working very closely with us and making this whole event run so smoothly. I think it is worth saying also, I think on your platform, on the left-hand side, there is a special little expo. You just hit expo and you're going to be given the opportunity of a lifetime. You'll be actually able to get a Fuel event given to you at a very, very effective rate. So if you could look at Hit Expo, go into the Fuel event offer, but also fill in the registration, because we got to know who's doing what. So I think that's something that'll be very much appreciated. I think, Gus, we've got 2 winners, and I'm going to hand it over to you. The first question, the winner of the answer, the person that got the winning answer, the first question is, the question was, what percentage of the world's aircraft are leased? And the winning answer was from?
Matthew Tracy.
Well done, Matthew. Matthew, you're the very lucky winner of a lovely meal from Chop House. Second question, and this is the big question, of course. This is the famous one. In what year did Gus Kelly win the Macquarie Cup? You might tell us what year it was, Gus.
1992.
1992, and the winner is?
John Burke.
John Burke. Well done, JF Burke. Outstanding stuff. I was looking at the questions, the answers there. You know how it is when you're doing this stuff. Look, folks, a fantastic, fantastic afternoon. So thankful to you, Gus. It's been absolutely wonderful. Obviously to the team, and Colin has said what they need to say. As I said at the beginning, this is the beginning of the end, but it's going to come really quickly. We had great times in Lansdowne in the past. We reminded ourselves of those. We're going to have even better times in the future. Gus, you gave us a huge lift. You gave us massive insight to what's going on in the world that's relevant to us and the greater and global world of aviation. For that, we're so thank you. To the team and to you all out there that have joined, even Mick Dawson. We really appreciate it. Here's to next year. Here's to a great year. Here's to the end of this pandemic. And here's to us all having a fantastic 2021, Q2, Q3 and Q4. Thank you very much.